It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.
Welcome to Dialogues with Dan, heard on Rockland World Radio every Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And now, Dialogues with Dan.
Richard, hi everyone. You're listening to Jim Glazer, Nyack banjo extraordinaire person. Let's hear Jim. Excellent. That was Jim Glazer, Nyack banjo player extraordinaire person. Yes. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Jim, maybe
Good
you...
to be here.
Oh, glad you can make it. Yeah, maybe you could tell us, Jim, a little about your background, where you grew up, and how you got into playing the banjo and what it all means.
Yeah, that's a big question. There's a lot of questions there.
It is.
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest, and I was actually born in New York, in Utica, New York, but only lived there 1 year, and then moved to the Midwest. Lived in Michigan and Illinois and Wisconsin, and grew up there in the woods, in Illinois especially, and that had a huge impact on my life. During the years of about from 5 to 10, we lived in a very woodsy area, and it just connected me with nature in a way that has been important all my life.
Yes.
And yeah.
So in what ways did this upbringing affect you, besides musically?
Well, I think the main thing was a sense of belonging. I guess it was that sense of being out in nature that I felt I automatically belonged in the world. And there were a lot of other things that kind of made me feel like I didn't belong. And, I was a rather shy person in school, and it was difficult connecting in some cases with, some of the peers.
Yes.
But it just was a very important part for me of just feeling like the world belongs to me too.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what sort of things did you do in the woods? And, it was very rural.
Yes,
It
it wasn't like farmland. Well, it was farmland, but
yes.
Part of our area where we lived, just a lot of young families living in this very woodsy area, and we did a lot of climbing. My brother and sister, we did a lot of climbing of trees and digging foxholes and hunting rabbits and
really
trailing creatures around.
Yes.
Playing cowboys and Indians especially. Yeah.
Yes. So, for a great part of your life, if not all, you've been a peaceful warrior. Is that a good way?
Well, I would certainly aspire to be that.
It's kind of like they're against each other. Peaceful warrior. You know?
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, I would. It became important to me after in college age to start thinking along those lines about personal human values, spiritual values,
Yes.
and peace
Very
certainly
good.
became very important. Yeah.
Yes, we're joined today by your sister in the audience.
Right.
Yes, and she.
My partner Diane too.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Diane and sis
Judy.
Judy. Glad you could make it.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, so, Jim, your growing years were very peaceful, and you've held on to those beliefs, those feelings, your entire life. And over the years, there's been many changes in society, wars, and, crimes and prejudices. And I know you said you've battled some of these unfairnesses. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could speak about, you said you've been to D.C. and walked for peace.
Mm-hmm.
How so?
Yeah, I let me back up just a little bit. I think for me, it's always been an issue when I've seen anybody who has not been given respect. And this certainly has come out a lot in racism questions in my background to some degree. And it's just been kind of that sense where someone is not treated as a human being and not given respect. So the whole, several different areas, but eventually the war in Vietnam seemed to me to be about that very same thing.
Right.
Not the way we treated the Vietnamese, the way that whole event occurred, and then the whole movement against racism was important for me in when I was in Michigan, and learning about racism, learning to try to be aware of my own racism, and trying to help protest
Right.
the need for anti-racist attitudes and laws, and so that led also to the protest movements about war.
I imagine it must have.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been to D.C. and maybe attended some of the rallies.
Right.
Rallies
And I
and
was at one rally in D.C.
yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember where that was?
Yeah, that was at the mall, at the D.C. Mall, when Nixon was being inaugurated the second time. So we were protesting his inauguration
Yes.
because of the war.
Do you think in some way it was effective?
I think so. I think people have pretty much acknowledged that there was the lack of support by the home front, by the American people, that eventually led to the collapse of our involvement in Vietnam.
Yes. And you're playing the banjo. Is this the only banjo you've had? Or did you have you had that for years?
This banjo I got from my partner Diane, and it was part of her family. So
Yes.
this one I've had for a couple of years now. And before that, for about 12 years, I had a 5-string banjo that I kept trying to play. I had a very difficult time with that instrument, but I couldn't sing and play at the same time with that instrument. It was just too much for me. But this banjo, with a different strumming approach, it works perfectly
Yes.
fine for me. I love
Excellent.
this banjo a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, Diane.
It's the guitar. I was never able to take to the guitar.
No,
No,
never.
But the banjo.
That's a great thing.
Yeah. It's a lot
So
of
I
fun.
imagine banjo helped to soothe some of these angry feelings about discrimination, racism, that you used your banjo as like peace way to get your feelings out.
Yes, it's true. And all kinds of feelings too. And just the struggles of life. I would just wake up and have some melody go through my head and just begin to play it on the banjo.
Yes.
And I found that playing the banjo, it gives me great encouragement and support in all kinds of areas of my life.
Yes. I imagine many of you didn't know, but you could find Jim on the corner of Broadway and Main in Nyack. He's out there and he plays on the street corner about how many times a week?
Well, about 3 times a week in good weather, I'd say.
Yes, and you do that out of your free spirit.
Yeah, I don't try to make any money at it.
Yes. Not that you would get money. No.
Right, not that I would get
No,
money. I have
yeah.
gotten some money
Oh.
occasionally, but first I used to turn it down, but now I take it if they give it to me because somebody wants to give me some money.
Yes, that's a great thing. Yes, and maybe you could play another song or two.
Sure.
That would be great.
Okay.
Jim Glazer, banjo extraordinaire, person.
Gave my love a cherry that had no stone. Gave my love a chicken that had no bone. I gave my love a story that had no end. And I gave my love a baby with no crying. How can there be a cherry that has no stone? How can there be a chicken that has no bone? How can there be a story that has no end? And how can there be a baby with no crying? Now you know the answer. Cherry when it's blooming, it has no stone. A chicken when it's pippin', it has no bone. The story that I love you, it has no end. And the baby when it's sleeping has no crying. I gave my love a cherry that had no stone. I gave my love a chicken that had no bone. I gave my love a story that had no end. And I gave my love a baby with no crying.
Oh, excellent. Yes,
Thank you.
very well done. Yes, so Jim, you had spoken about role models. Like, who would you say are some of your role models? And what makes a role model?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would certainly say Martin Luther King and Gandhi. I'm not going to remember some people. I know that. Jimmy Carter, Pete Seeger.
And you had
Nelson
said,
Mandela.
yes, you had said Sitting Bull.
Sitting Bull. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right,
Maybe
right.
could you speak a little about what Sitting Bull stood for?
Yeah, I recently had an adventure in Saskatchewan, Canada. I went there to do some writing, and it happened to be right in the area of Canada where Sitting Bull had gone with his people after the Battle of Little Bighorn. And he was being chased by the cavalry, and he and about 6,000 of his people crossed over into Canada and were basically refugees there, trying to decide, what in the world they could do next. And so I did some research on Sitting Bull and finding out about him and his life, and I became very amazed at his character. He had a great deal of kindness and compassion. He was not he was a very strong person and very courageous in many cases. One of the things that he would do occasionally to help instill some bravery in some of his warriors was during some kind of a battle, he would stand up and walk out in between the two lines of fighting people. Yes. And just sit down and smoke his pipe. And he did this on a number of occasions. Once he got injured, but he didn't often. But basically, it was just conveying the idea of strength and resistance. And I think the other thing that was important about him was that he was like somebody like Martin Luther King or somebody like that, somebody who would, or maybe more like Malcolm X, somebody who was strongly dedicated to the liberation and the freedom of his people. And this was at a time when the whites basically were extremely treacherous in their dealings with Native Americans and very greedy for their land. And so it involved a tremendous disappointment to him to find that he couldn't trust these white people at all. And so he was a person who would fight. Certainly, he wasn't a person who refused to fight, but he was not a murderous, treacherous, wild man who was, murdering women and children.
Yes. As far as currently, who would you say is a current role model, or a peaceful figure?
That's a good question.
Like you, Bob Dylan, John Lennon. Well, of course, he's not living.
Right.
But
right. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the people in the Middle East who, on both sides of the conflict there, are trying to generate peaceful solutions.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the people who particularly work with young people and try to get them to exchange, have exchange visits, camping experiences together, youth of both Palestinian and Jewish, to try to break down some of those divisions.
I haven't heard about that. Maybe you could explain that a little more. You said they're bringing groups together.
Right. I know that. I don't know. I know that one group, the organization that's part of that kind of thing, is FOR here in Fellowship of Reconciliation in our town, that tries to bring, and they work a lot with adults too, bringing adults over there to meet with different groups of people and have dialogue with Jewish and Palestinian people, just to raise people's awareness of what the other group is like.
Oh, it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get there.
Another thing that I think is, to me, is important, is the people who are working in cooperatives across the United States.
Yes.
The whole cooperative movement, attempting to have employee-owned businesses, so that we're not just under the thumb of corporations for every aspect of our lives. There is quite a huge cooperative movement going across the country for all kinds of things like energy, food,
Yes.
distribution,
Yes.
farming.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess what Cropsey Farms would be one example of that, probably,
Oh,
in our area.
exactly. Yeah, before our interview, we were speaking about like different companies, the way they're not conducive to broadening people and educating. Is that correct?
I think we were thinking about the farming, related
Yes.
to the farming. Yeah, it seems like there's a real crisis, and I don't pretend to know all about it at all, but just there's a real problem in a lot of indigenous communities, and also Latin America particularly, I guess, in terms of crops, in terms of managing their own crops rather than having multinational
Yes.
corporations dictating what kind of crops they'll have or what kind of seeds they'll use.
Yes.
And that whole effort to, there's a lot of fascinating study going on about how wild varieties of different crops are stronger than the genetically engineered varieties are.
Yes.
They're more adapted. You know, if you in a community you have maybe a corn variety that is used to that environment and has adapted to that environment,
Right.
versus one that some seed company brings in and has tried to engineer in such a way that they can prevent all these problems with it, but it still doesn't give you the quality of the product of the wild variety
Yes.
that's right there.
Yeah, don't a lot of local towns and cities have their own gardens?
Mm-hmm.
Local gardens.
Right, like we do here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you travel to towns all across the nation
Mm-hmm.
to see local gardens, right?
Right.
And that's important. People are in charge of their own diets and
Right.
milk,
Yeah.
vegetables, fruits.
Right.
Yes.
There's another person too that I would have as a role model, would be Wendell Berry, who's a farmer in Kentucky and a poet, a very wonderful poet,
Yes.
and a person who has written a great deal about the land, about the use of
Yes.
land, about the importance of land, and
That was a great segue. About your poetry. Yeah, Jim is a poet enthusiast, and you've brought a few of your poems.
yeah, I have.
Yes, please
Okay.
share them.
Okay.
Jim Glazer, poet extraordinaire, person. Jim likes to stand up when he reads his poetry.
Right.
but maybe you'll sit down.
Would you like me to sit
Because
down?
the
Because the camera
camera-
won't get me.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try. I'll see if I can still read when I sit down.
Yeah.
I hope I can.
It's like
It would
chewing
help if I
gum.
had my glasses.
It's like chewing gum, right?
Right. This is a very short poem, and I'll read it twice because it's quite short. Late afternoon, my writing stops. Daughter talking to her train.
Yes.
And I'll read that again.
Yeah, please do.
Late afternoon, my writing stops. Daughter talking to her train. And that poem was an incident long ago with my youngest daughter.
Yes.
I'd work out in the guest house, and I was out there writing all the time, and I was writing away. And she would come in sometimes and had her toys over there and would be playing. And so I was writing anyhow. And suddenly I heard this talking. And so I looked up and looked over there, and she was carrying on a conversation with the train. Train was going around. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, this was your daughter?
My daughter. I have two
Yes.
daughters out in California, in
Really?
L.A. area.
Are they grown now?
Yeah, they are. And I have two grandchildren,
Oh,
twins.
excellent.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
So what gives you your poetry? What inspires you? Is it real life and humanity?
Yeah, it is. Like in that case, it was my daughter. It's
Yes.
something that occurred to me. Sometimes it's something very subtle, like just taking a walk and seeing what I see. Sometimes it's an inner conflict that I feel a kind of sort of inspiration, I would say, a sense of being onto something. It's hard to explain. It's in my poetry, the first time I really got going on poetry was when I moved at one point away from all the people in Michigan that we had a very tight community with.
Yes.
And moved to California, and none of those people were there, and I really missed that companionship. And I found myself writing in order to deal with that feeling of loss. And so those kind of feelings lead to poems.
Yes.
Um,
And these type poems, I forgot what they're called.
Well, this kind of poem right here is sort of like a haiku. in a
Yeah,
way.
that's right.
That's,
And it's supposed to capture a moment, right?
Exactly.
Is that,
Yeah, that's right. And there's
our friend Ernie Sherman
yes,
is a haiku extraordinaire
yes,
person.
he is. He
Yes.
really is.
Yeah. But, I believe we met at the Poetry Jam.
Yeah, that's right.
Here in
That's
Nyack.
right. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, you were in charge of those poetry
Yes.
jams when I first came.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so would you read
Sure.
maybe a few more?
Mm-hmm.
Jim Glazer, poet enthusiast, person. Take two.
This one is called Prometheus. And maybe you remember that Prometheus is the god the one who stole fire from the gods and brought it down to people
Really?
and to save humanity. Prometheus, you broke through at dusk, striding east, flying your own huge shadow in the bed of the sun. Perhaps you knew I would not hold my darkness dear, or weave from my accustomed gloom some garment or a velvet glove, but stretch out my hand, link bone with bone, lay hold upon not only the flickering light, but the clandestine scent of the flame.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
Yes, and so I guess that you took the topic of fire and you wrote a poem around all the things fire represents.
That's interesting. I think what happened for me was that I started this, I don't know where the image first started from for me, but I saw this huge person, because Prometheus was supposed to be a giant.
Yes.
So here's this huge person, and he's holding this flame. But suddenly I saw it this way. I saw him coming from the west to the east. And so as he would walk, he would be throwing his own shadow behind him towards where the sun had just gone down in the west. So he's walking eastward, and so he's holding this flame. So I just had that image of this shadow, this huge shadow being behind him.
Yes.
And then somehow the poem just took off. I don't really know how it went from there, but it just it did.
Yes.
And then I imagined myself reaching for the flame
Fascinating.
and smelling the smell of it as much as anything else.
Well, very good. So in your poems, do you just sit down and write it in one sitting, or do you work at it and maybe change things, words, or how is it done?
Right. Well, usually it starts with me writing something down. I always carry some kind of a notebook with me. I've always done that. And so I'll start out with something that I've jotted down. And then later on I'll take a look at it, and it'll begin to grow a little bit.
Yes.
And then I'll revisit it and change it in certain ways. So it's tricky about changing it, but I don't try to keep it what it was originally.
Right.
I'm willing to change it.
Oh, that's...
And it's important for me to it's kind of like, if you if you saw something and drew it or something like that, and then later on you came back and you looked at it from another direction,
Sure.
So it's like that with my emotional experiences.
Yes.
I can come back and view them again another time. That's something that happens with me. I can go back to a situation or an emotional moment,
Yes.
and I can look at it again, and see more about it sometimes.
So it's like life. Like you don't just, live life the same way every time. You adapt, you change your style.
Recreate.
Yeah, life is like an ongoing process.
Yeah.
There's a poem in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
it is.
like life isn't black and white.
Right.
It's changing.
Yeah.
And we have to change with it. Yes.
It's good. It's difficult to talk about how I make a poem, because it's a very personal process. It's sort of like asking somebody how they play the piano. It's connected already, with it's in their hands.
Yes.
And their heart and their mind, it's all together. And so it's kind of hard to say how you do it.
I look at it a little different. I think, as far as playing a piano, it's the only one way, really, how to play it. But with poetry or painting, there's like different shades of what you do it differently over time. But
It's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of like, for me, like I have a part of my personality or my mind or whatever that
yes.
keeps space available for poetry to come up.
Excellent. So, Jim, before we end in the next few minutes,
Sure.
maybe you could give us a few of the bullet points of your way of life. You know, the youth, a little older, and now, the way your peaceful ways, the way your outlook is.
Well, I think,
Excuse me.
sure.
Like, I imagine the way you were as a child different from how you were as a middle-aged person. And a little after that,
Right.
and time
Right.
moved on.
Well, I think it's been important to me to search. Searching has been very important for me.
Yes.
And also connecting with other people has been extremely important to me. And discovering how to, and it sounds simpler than it is, but I think connecting with other people is probably, and with life, is probably the most difficult and most important thing that we have to do. And I think love is involved in that. All kinds of things are involved. But also involved is respecting yourself and knowing yourself
Yes.
and accepting yourself. Without that, there isn't any connection. So I've gone through periods of time where I had to learn that it wasn't enough to just try to be a nice guy. And then other times when I, had to learn, again, what I had to contribute that I was holding back.
Yes.
And so I've had a lot of things to learn from other people. And I think the other thing that's important, another thing that's important to me, is seeing life as a mystery. I still like that word a lot. It means to me that we're in this universe, and we're amazingly benefited and taken care of. And not only before we were born, but now that we're here, and then after we die, we can sense that the universe takes care of us.
Yes.
We're part of the universe. We're not something that landed here from another star.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end our show. It sounds like a Twilight Zone, But Jim Glazer,
Thank you, Dan.
thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
on
My
Dialogues
pleasure.
with Dan. Well, everyone, have a great week. Peace.
It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.